All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, whoever you are, new listeners, returning friends. Thank you for choosing to listen. I am coming to you under unusual circumstances. Some of you may know I am in the midst of a trip abroad. Last weekend, I was in Manchester, England, and now I'm in Dublin, Ireland. And this has been my first time here. It's been fantastic. I've had a few days to check it out. I went to Simon's and had a cinnamon roll. If you know, you know. Had my requisite pint of Guinness today. Cheers to my friends, Jacinta, for making some arrangements for me while I'm here. For Lisa, good to see you. And David, good to see you. I don't know if they're going to listen to this, but I had some friends in Ireland, and it's been quite lovely to take in this fair land. And tomorrow, I'm doing my workshop here, and honestly, I really put myself in a pickle because before I left, you might recall, I said something about recording intros and outros before I leave so I don't have to do it while I'm traveling. Well, it didn't happen. As you know, last week I did it like on the fly. I did it the night that I finished my workshop in Manchester. I like squeezed it in before it had to get out, right? And this week I'm realizing that I can't even do that. If I wait, if I don't do this right now, I'm going to be totally up against it because I'm finishing on Sunday night and then I'm leaving the next morning, so I don't have time to do stuff. And this is like has to happen now, and I really put myself in a bind. So here we are, making it happen. And I have so much that I want to share. It's been a really amazing time to be with people and to really delve into what I feel like is the most appropriate thing for me to be doing as a teacher right now. And a lot of it has to do with the whatever it is, the yoga practice that I'm doing. It has to be relevant to a person's life. It can't be this abstracted thing. It's just we're in a time now where people aren't messing around. Like if it's not going to really help, forget it. You know, like I don't know. My thoughts aren't fully formed. As I said, I'm in the midst right now, but something about the relationship between teachers and students and the kinds of community that we have around practice and finding the spaces for that allow for the kind of transformational exchanges and practices that we want. I don't know if that means anything. These thoughts are not fully formed. I need a little more time to process them. And you know what? I got still a lot left to do here. In many regards, this idea of what makes yoga relevant and what brings people together in yoga is very much what my conversation today is about. My guest is Bobbi Paidel. Bobbi is the host of A Curious Yogi Podcast, and she sent me an email some while back, and I put her in a file for a couple of reasons that jumped out at me, which I share with her, so I'll save it till then. But Bobbi is someone who comes from a generation after me, who I think is an example of someone who's living their yoga and came into yoga in a different way, has a context for their practice that is not like the classes at the gym or whatnot. It's like a very different understanding of where yoga practice fits into your life, as I was just sort of referencing. And it just so happens that I recorded this conversation with Bobbi before I left, and it fits in perfectly with what's been happening. So I was glad to have a chance to connect with Bobbi, and I'm very glad to be sharing it with you today. Other than that, if you want to connect with me outside of listening to this show, there's lots of ways to do that. You just go to my website. There's ongoing classes and discussion groups and training. And by far the best thing you could do would be subscribe to my free email list and stay up to date with stuff. Everything that I'm doing can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I feel like these last few intros have been really guerrilla style, I'm out of my usual routines. I'm in foreign countries. But, we make it happen no matter what. And this is just going to have to be good enough. I will touch base with you on the other side for a quick moment, but we're going to go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Bobbi Paidel.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Bobbi.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I got you. For a second there, I couldn't hear you, but now you're here. We've made it. We've made it together here.
Yes. I'm pretty technically challenged, so it always takes me a couple extra moments than probably the rest of a lot of people.
No, I wouldn't say that. Don't knock yourself. Sometimes the technology serves us and sometimes it doesn't. But most of the time in this context for the show, it does serve me very well. And I can hear you now just fine. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Coming through perfect.
Good. Well, listen, I don't know how familiar you are with this show. I am already recording, and if it's okay with you, I want us to consider ourselves having just begun.
Perfect. Love that.
Very cool. Well, listen, let me say a few things to you about why you're here, why I reached out to talk to you. It's for you, and it's for anybody else listening. I always like to set a little context for the conversation because a lot of times there's other kinds of reasons why people end up here on the show. You have a podcast, so you might know this. I don't know what your experience has been, but sometimes, people have written books, or sometimes there's a certain something that I'm thinking about or wanting to learn about. And so I'm seeking out certain people, or a lot of times people listen to the show and then they give me ideas of people to reach out to. Lately, I think I've been spending a lot of time on trying to get people on the show who are my elders, people who, came before me, and to kind of set down oral history and, pick their brains for some more in-depth insights where I can.
Me too.
Yes, I noticed. Yeah. I noticed because I saw, I'll get to it. One of the things that I used to do on the show more that I haven't been doing much lately was sometimes just reaching out to a listener, just bringing a random listener on the show to talk to them. Mm-hmm. Or another thing I like to do is talk to other podcasters who are in the yoga realm. Specifically with you reached out to me some while ago, and I noticed two things about you that put you into the file to potentially have you on. One was that you were a cattle rancher's daughter.
Yeah.
Who then went to India and met a guru and now is all into the Vedas. And I was like, wait a second. Because I'm similar, I grew up in Los Angeles, California in the 80s. And nobody in my family or anywhere around me was into yoga. Even though there was yoga in LA, I didn't have any frame of reference for it. And in a way, the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles in the 80s is probably as far away from Vedic knowledge as a cattle ranch was for you,
Definitely, yeah.
But the fact that we both, for whatever reason, had some very deep impulse to yoga, I'm very curious about that. That's very interesting to me that some people kind of break from their own cultural upbringings because they have this deep passion for yoga. And I felt like I recognized that in you. Would you say that that's true about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. And I also like really appreciate what you're saying, because I've noticed from doing my podcast also, and just like chatting and visiting and talking with other people that have really decided to step on to this exploration of Indian philosophy and deep spirituality, that like there is this thread, this underlying thread that is so clear when you speak with someone like you and I are going to speak right now, that it's so potent, like the deep being inside that's like, I want more, with like, no matter what the background appeared to be, it's like so clear. And I love seeing that thread. So hearing you say that, it's like, yes, I definitely can agree.
Yeah. And I also I don't know your age, so I don't want to make assumptions, but I think I might be older than you. And yeah. Do you mind saying how old you are? If you don't want to say, you don't have to say, but I'm curious.
No, I don't mind. I'm 38, but it's also interesting, like you saying you grew up in the 80s in LA, and I grew up in the 90s in rural Alberta, Canada. Like, but it doesn't matter also age. Like, no. I love also that you're interested in speaking with your elders, because I also am so interested in that. But even speaking with my elders, or ones who have been deep into this knowledge for like decades, there still is this sense of oneness when you like are in front of someone, where you have that shared desire to go beyond age, culture, nationality, all of those labels. So it's really cool. Absolutely. And the thing that I was thinking about with you being sort of like, I've been focused on the generations that came before me, and you're a generation that's come after mine. I've been, a lot of the conversation that my generation was having, and maybe the one just after, was that, people were coming into yoga in like these yoga centers, but this is probably before the pandemic, maybe more than today, but there was these, kind of spa environment yoga centers where an emphasis on asana really pervaded all, in a sense. And that I even spoke to a senior teacher recently. He hasn't published yet. He's a very senior teacher, but he basically said that the yoga classes became aerobics classes largely, that they were following that model. And then a lot of us who kind of stepped into yoga just before it made that kind of shift into a fitness orientation, we've all been like wanting to like bring it back to the more subtle contemplative aspects of practice, especially as I'm getting into my 50s now. It's like you get into these different life stages, and if you stay in it at a certain point, it kind of serves these different roles. And it's interesting to me because it seems like your entrance into yoga was not necessarily like a modern postural yoga 200-hour teacher training situation. Mm-hmm. And I'm intrigued by that. So how does a cattle rancher from Alberta, Canada, end up getting into yoga? Well, I mean, it's to make a real long story short, I think also something that I've noticed within myself, like reflecting back on growing up and the path that I've taken and the path that many other yoga practitioners have taken, is like a real deep sense of dissatisfaction, like from a young age, which now I can correlate to like a divine uneasiness that has pushed me onto this path. But growing up, I was always like, I am an alien. How did I end up here? Like I always had this sense of like an uneasiness that pushed me into addiction and mental health issues, and I really struggled for a long time. And I did my undergrad in dance, so I was in performing arts, and I had scoliosis. And one of my professors in university said, like, you should go to yoga to help align your spine. And I was like, I'd never even heard of yoga. Like, I grew up dancing in dance studios in my little small town. So I was always like a mover and really into anatomy and studying anatomy and dance. And it all kind of made studying anatomy in university. It kind of like interested me in that way. And I know it's kind of like also a cliche that people can remember stepping into their first yoga class and just something deeper resonated with me besides like how I felt physically, because I was struggling with my mental health. I was feeling uneasy. I was feeling like, what is the meaning of life? Like, I always had this deeper questioning inside of me, and it's just like a little doorway. So even now, as like someone that's been practicing yoga for 20 years and really studying, like you said, those deeper contemplative elements that I feel are so beneficial to anybody, regardless if you've stepped into that spa yoga studio, or I had one podcast guest, he called it strip mall yoga. And I'm like, as much as I'm wanting to move away from that in a sense and encourage other curious yoga practitioners to also move that way, it was the doorway for me. So I can never really diss on it that much.
Hey, I don't know if that's a good name, strip mall, because if you can get a space in a strip mall for cheap and open up a place that doesn't have to, get massive amounts of people in, then maybe it's okay. Who cares if it's in a strip mall? But I think I know what your guest was referring to,
yeah.
Which was what I was referring to, which was a certain trends that were happening in yoga where there was an idea that that people were coming into it for the body stuff, and that maybe they would find their way to it. But a lot of times it wasn't always leading people to these deeper contemplative things. But it did for you. So first of all, what was the yoga like that you first found your way to? Like, what were the kind of classes like? Were they in a particular tradition or style? Were they just vinyasa classes? What would they look like?
Yeah, like here in Canada, like hot yoga is such a big trend right now, which is kind of interesting. Like studying in India, they're like, what is hot yoga? Like we study in the morning when it's not hot, because that's crazy. But getting really into like hot vinyasa was something that was my doorway, and like studying and teaching dance and like living in that world, I always thought like teaching yoga is something I could possibly think about doing. But I also realized like I'm just kind of here for the physical benefits, and it was amazing. And I always really loved it on the physical sense. And it did give me some ease, but I was still, even though going to 5-6 vinyasa classes a week, still struggling with mental health, still feeling such dissatisfaction in the world and self-medicating and having all these like habits and behaviors that didn't align with the way that I wanted to move. And so I was living in Australia, and I was like super just down and out, like really struggling. And a good friend of mine, she was like, oh, why don't you come to India? And I was like, oh, no. Like, I can't go to India. That's way too overwhelming for me. I'm just like a small town girl. Like living in Sydney, Australia was like the biggest thing I'd ever done. And
let me just interject for a second. I read that you had like a career that you were starting in fashion and stuff at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, like I was working in fashion in Toronto and New York, and then I moved to Sydney to like carry on my fashion, because I also, in this whole like, being in the early 20s for like anybody, I just have such compassion for it's such a confusing time. And I always found that uneasiness, I was always chasing the next thing. Let me move to this. Let me get out as far away from this cattle ranch in Alberta as I can. So I would move to one city, move to the next city, move to Toronto, go to New York, go to Sydney. And still, like, I'm building up this career. I'm earning decent money. I'm like, in the scene. And still, like, I wake up every day and like, I'm not satisfied. Like I just kept chasing and chasing. And eventually, like, I don't even know what inspired me. I've never wanted to go to India. I never even had heard of an ashram or a guru or anything. I had just been to the yoga studios. I liked yoga. A really good friend of mine was living in India for, I thought, visiting her aunt. She was a good friend, but she's also very private, and she never told me, I'm here, I have a teacher, anything like that. So long story short, I very totally, where am I kind of a vibe, get to India with, $800, like didn't have a lot of money, just kind
what
of.
Year is it when you, what year is it when you got there?
2014.
Okay.
So I was pretty desperate at that time. I had also tried to start learning how to meditate in Sydney. I was going to the Buddhist center there, and they have free meditations. But at that point, I was like, this isn't resonating. And I ended up in northern India, way as far north as I could have even imagined, like the dot on the map. And I met up with my friend, and right away I was like, do you know somewhere in this area where I can study meditation and practice yoga? Like, I'm really seeking something. And she said, well, actually, I stay in a community. I have a teacher, and my aunt's been living here for 40 years. And she started reading notes to me from satsang. And at that time I was like, what is satsang? Now I know what satsang is. Mm-hmm. And just hearing what is now I know is Vedic wisdom, and just that vision of oneness, hearing it. And that day, we were walking in the forest, I was just started crying. I was like, what is this knowledge? What is this? I want to learn this. It's just really resonating so deeply. And so I went and requested to come and visit and attend a satsang. And actually just a few months ago watched the video and listened to the audio of my first meeting with my teacher. And just to see the girl that was there, and to see the transformation that's happened in my life in the last 9 years, from really stepping into the teachings of yoga, which I remember the first day I'm like, this guy is talking about yoga, but I've never heard any of this. And now I see it's the guideposts for one that's seeking, which now I know asana, like you said before, is such a small component of what it means to live a healthy and whole and yogic life. And it just really changed my life in that day where I met my teacher, and I fell in love, not with him as the person, but with the teachings and the way in that he taught. And specifically the meditation. I had been trying to meditate, and in those first days of practicing meditation and meditating with all these very experienced meditators that had been meditating, people from all over the world. And people now too say oh, you stay in an ashram. It's yeah, but we don't really practice yoga. We meditate, and you practice yoga on your own. And because it is a more senior community, the average age in the ashram I stay in is around 60 years old. So I'm considered one of the kids at 38, So just being around this seeped energy of people who have devoted their lives to meditating, understanding who am I before and after any identification or qualification comes on to me as the pure free being. Just getting to understand that and live that, not only in the ashram but in my day-to-day life, has transformed anything I could have ever imagined. I really felt before I met my teacher, before I went to India for the first time, I was headed on a path that wasn't headed anywhere very healthy or good, and I was really stuck. And then in the years that have passed since then, it's wow, okay, I know that this works because it's worked for me. And just understanding the power of meditation and living the principles of yoga. And before, when we were talking about the spa yoga, and that we want to move towards those more contemplative elements. As a yoga practitioner, as someone that was seeking before, it's so rare to find teachers that haven't just crushed out of the 200-hour yoga teacher training. Now I'm a yoga teacher, and to see like that there's a gap there. And I definitely now, as a yoga teacher myself, like it's so important for me to bring in even the smallest little crack of light into the deep wisdom that the yoga scriptures, and specifically Advaita Vedanta and the way that I've been studying it, can have in someone's life. And it doesn't matter if you can do an asana or not. It doesn't matter if you've ever stepped into a yoga studio. Like, the power and the brilliance of recognizing who we are doesn't happen in a yoga class. It happens in the privacy of our own heart, like in our seat, in our practice. So for me, like my teacher always emphasized, sadhana is the way of your life. Your daily practice will be the salvation and the practice that gives you the realization of who you are. And he would say, like, I can give you the food, but you have to eat it. And I think we live in a culture, in a world where it's like everybody just wants something handed to them, but this is a work. So we have to do the work. So for me, I'm so passionate about sharing the value of sadhana and how we can begin to, in such simple ways, live these teachings day to day, like not only in our practice in the morning, but in our each conversation, in our work, and in all relationships. Like, how can we live it? Because if we're not living it, then it's, you know, that's where we need to be headed, or that's where I've decided to focus my life for sure after meeting my teacher and really deciding, like, yes, this is the path I want to take in my life, and this is where I want to put my attention.
Well, I think we're singing the same song in that regard, and you made many good points there. In particular, I like the way that you connected sadhana with living principles. I think that's true. That when people talk about yoga being off the mat, it's sort of like a catchphrase for a lot of times, but the fact that the off the mat is the actual practice, and on the mat, just like brushing your teeth or like prayer, you know. is an important point. I'm curious about the community that you found and the teacher that you found. Are you comfortable to name that teacher? I know sometimes people don't want to, and I totally respect that, but I am curious about, like, so you mentioned Advaita Vedanta, but is it like a long-standing tradition or lineage that it's associating with, or this community? Does it have a name that you would feel comfortable to share?
Yeah, I'm totally happy to share. My teacher's name is Swami Sham. He passed away in 2017 when he was 94. And his tradition that he learned from his guru from the age of 6. His guru lived with his family in their small village in central India. And Advaita Vedanta is basically the philosophy that he grew up learning, like studying the Upanishads and meditation. And from there, he went on to have a family and have a sort of householder life. And then in his mid-40s, he gained realization, and from there, like, built up a community, and his kids are still very much involved in the ashram. And it was like, it's hard to explain. I mean, anybody that's listening that has had this connection with a guru or a elder or some experienced guide in one's life, when you have that meeting, it's such a profound experience of meeting one's own self. That's the only way I can explain it. Like, for the first time in my life, having the recognition of who I am beyond any sense of identification that I had ever felt. Like, even, you know, meeting my parents, it's like, of course I feel love from them, but it's the love of a parent, and they love me as a daughter. But that feeling, that recognition of meeting a realized being, it was so exposed. I felt very exposed in the sense that pure free being that I now recognize that you and I both are was revealed to me just in that meeting with my teacher. And that also sense of respect and a mutual, just a recognition of the space. And I think, even using the language of guru now, it can be so loaded.
Yes, I'm saying, because what's interesting to me is I said I've been talking to my elders, and a lot of these elders are people who went to India and met gurus and had similar experiences that you're describing. You hear Krishna Das talk about meeting his guy, or like that there's just something that's happened. And I've had some experience of being in the room with someone, and just being in the room with them had an impact on me for sure, but not in the way that you're describing, where you feel like that kind of relationship to them as a teacher in that way. I mean, I've had many teachers, but it's rare that people in more recent times after the year 2000 still have that experience of meeting someone like that. I guess my curiosity is, for you, was it a feeling that you had when you were with your teacher? Was it something specific that your teacher said to you that impacted you in this way?
Yeah, I think like what you're saying of just being in the room with that kind of energy and that kind of presence, it's such a clear, potent space. And, my teacher was 91 when I met him, and I feel like I really got the tail end there. Like a lot of his devotees and community have been with him like for 45 years. And like at this point, it was a closed ashram. It was like you had to write a letter to come. You had to know someone. You had to have been vegetarian for 1 year. Meanwhile, I'm coming from the cattle ranch. I'm like, what's vegetarian now? So just like the whole experience of going in there, I think was very overwhelming for me because I had no idea. But there's this saying in the scriptures, and I really love it. And it says, like, when you take 10 steps towards your guru, which that could be Sadguru, your inner guru takes 1,000 steps towards you. And I feel like at that time when I met Swamiji, I was very ready and open to hearing this knowledge. And it's not like I had a personal relationship with my teacher. I had maybe over the years, 3 years that he was in the body, alive and talking, that when I was there visiting, and I had maybe 10 interactions with him in front of 50 or 100 people. Like, it wasn't like I was sitting there asking him about the meaning of life. He's speaking the satsang generally to the audience. And in those few moments that I did have with him to ask questions, and they were very short, but it's because it's not a personal relationship, one with the teacher and the student. Like, the guru is the one who dispels the darkness. And I felt when I met my teacher, I was in a place of darkness, and the wisdom, which he's speaking, which is so ancient. Like, even when now, like, one of my favorite books is I Am That by Nisargadatta, because he speaks so similarly to Swamiji. Like, it's very like clear that the knowledge and the wisdom is timeless. Fine, there's an Indian man with a beard or whoever else is speaking the knowledge, but the knowledge is timeless, and the knowledge is why we're attracted to the space, to the satsang, to the guru, because the being inside wants to know the being as it truly is, which is beyond the illusion of body, mind, ego, the whole mechanism. So I think that experience that I had, like, I didn't have the words for it at the time. Like, I had zero language. I was like totally overwhelmed. But at that same time, I recognized what this community is speaking and living. I didn't even know. I thought it was like, I was weirded out at first, but now I know, like, Vedic knowledge and the way the tradition is lived in India is something more normal in India. Like, it's more common. Like, kids in India grow up hearing, you are God, God is everywhere. Whereas, like, I grew up in a Christian community where it's like, God is over there, you better be good or you're gonna go to hell. Like, it's such a different, the essence of it is there. And that real teaching of oneness is something that it just was like a light bulb. I was like, this makes sense to my mind. And when I sit and I meditate and I can have that experience of everlasting presence, of unchanging bliss, like that essence, that underlying essence that is there, that one experiences in meditation, like it resonated as true. So I can't make any opinions or comments on any other teachers or gurus or anything like that, because I haven't, I wasn't even looking for that. I had an experience and it resonated as true. It's impacted my life, my yoga practice, my teaching, every element of my life, to be honest, in such a positive, powerful, profound way that, like, it's just what's worked for me. And I don't think that people need to go searching for a guru, because when you're ready to hear the knowledge, you'll hear the knowledge in whatever way it comes. But first we have to have the earnestness, the readiness, the willingness to be open to hear what we need, and then to digest it and sit on it and contemplate it for ourselves, because that's where the real profundity of the human experience can happen, is there when we take it in ourselves. Like, it's one thing for the enlightened being or the big teacher, the experienced teacher. We live in also this kind of strange place where there's like celebrity yoga teachers and stuff, and I know they're all speaking a lot of great knowledge, but to just take things face value and not actually sit with them and contemplate them and make them our own, then it's like, I think there's a real missed opportunity. So whether you're sitting in front of a realized 94-year-old Indian guru, or you're sitting, next to a friend, like, can we take in the information that's coming and really contemplate it ourselves? Because I think that's where we can begin to live that vision of oneness and begin to make ourselves better, in a sense, or not better, but like more expanded, so that we can share that vision of oneness wherever we go and whoever we're with. And I also don't think that it's about preaching or anything. We just have to live it. And people get turned on to freedom. People get turned on to freedom because our true nature is free. So we get attracted to that. So I think just by living it, that's how it can continue to sort of carry on, in a sense.
Well, I certainly think that's true. And to one of your earlier points, at least I did, you need models for something. If you've never met anyone who sees life in certain ways or understands certain things about life that maybe are from your culture, they have a certain, again, kind of resonance to them. And just being around that person, you're like, oh, it's possible. Like, oh, wow, there are people who see life in a different way. And that opens up possibilities for you. I also have had people on the show who equated spiritual awakening with recognizing that what you've been told isn't the whole truth. And so sometimes I think, particularly if you're born and raised in kind of modern West, like it seems we were, where there is a conception of life that isn't as expansive as the Eastern spiritual traditions. At least that's my own opinion of it, I guess. My own biased view, that it does kind of open up all these worlds for someone, which I think is very powerful and empowering. I guess the interesting thing that you also said was about how you said like a realized guru experience, and then like sitting next to your friend. I guess that's been one of the big evolutions in a way, is that the teacher-student dynamics have had to change to some degrees, because there were Western teachers who tried to like assume the role of realized enlightened beings and, really weren't, I guess you'd say, or at least had behaviors. But even people who were recognized as realized beings have had misgivings. Huge spiritual figures of big communities that inspired so many people and were abusive to other people. So it's very confusing sometimes for people to sort out even the notion of having a guru. But I do like the way that you also said that, like, the knowledge of yoga is a universal thing that doesn't require you to go to India and meet a 93-year-old person. But I guess I'm curious, as a teacher yourself, do you take a more like personal relationship to your students compared to like Indian teachers that you met?
Well, I would say I do take a more personal role because I'm not an enlightened being, you know. I would say I'm on a path. I'm on a yogic path and I live a certain lifestyle, and I've overcome certain challenges, specifically with addiction and mental health, that other people can relate to. So in that sense, maybe a personal relationship, but I don't even feel comfortable taking on like the role of like, you know, I'm your teacher. I would rather say like, we are, you know, this is an individual work, but we need each other to reflect and, like you said, model and spiritual friend. Exactly. Like the satsang and the sangha, like, is such an important part of it. Like, we need to have the discernment to put ourselves in the company of other people that are inspiring us and walking this path. Like my asana teacher, Stuart Gilchrist, I don't know if you've heard of him, but I'd
name sounds familiar, but I don't know much about him. Where is he from, or where did you meet him?
I met him actually in India also. He's a Scottish teacher. He lives in London, and he's in the last 3 years really become my main yoga teacher. Like, he's not my guru because I have a guru. I'm not looking for that, but he is definitely my yoga teacher, and I study with him a lot. And he also came from like a wild background of drugs and alcohol and sex from the 60s. And he said at a certain point, I had to stop hanging around with DJs and drug dealers and start hanging around with yoga teachers. And that's when he really accredited like his life to changing. And I think that's the same for all of us. Like, we have the discernment to put ourselves in that company. And then it's like, it's a reciprocal relationship that we have with one another, whether like one's considered more advanced or in whatever element, you know, like, we are equals. And that's such a beautiful part of non-dualism. Is like, it's one thread, it's one being. Anything that's going to separate or differentiate us is just an illusion. And like, yes, we need to function on the relative field and use our mind and our ego and our intellect to like keep ourselves safe and survive in this world. And we recognize and we practice that it's our own being. Like, when I look at my guru, he's saying, you are me, you are guru. Like, it's one being. And I think, you know, we all have to really kind of decipher through like a lot of bullshit meters when we're deciding, who am I going to study with? Like, there's so many, like, going back to what you were saying, like, disingenuine teachers out there, that it is important that we use that discernment. We use our deep own inner knowing to decipher, okay, who or what am I going to put my intention on? And
or what you're going to listen to outside of a yoga teacher even. It's very hard to discern what's true and not true these days. And some kind of inner barometer, I agree, is essential.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's like, you know, definitely a point worth noting, for sure.
Absolutely. I guess the other thing that you said that I'm thinking about now is you mentioned that when you got to the ashram initially and you met your teacher there, your guru, I guess I don't know if those two things are, I guess you would say guru, the guru that you met, you said something about how prior to that you always struggled with meditation and you even attempted some forms of Buddhist meditation, but something about the way that it was presented to you at the ashram changed that. And I'm curious about what that is. What was it about the approach? Because I've had a lot of different people.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.